Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. The realization du jour that we explore today is that you're missing out on the vast majority of reality on emotive and spiritual levels. We discuss what it's like to read unconscious emotional motives and why most people don't see them, how the backlighting of nonduality changes your experience of truth, how abiding with divinity changes your experience of meaning, and of course, much more. We begin with a question from one of our listeners about the challenges of breaking technology with one's own energy field, a very real problem that many people have. If that's you, then sorry, and hopefully this helps. Thanks for listening. Well, greetings and welcome forward, everybody. This is, I'm quite confident, episode 68, give or take one or two, or 67. It doesn't matter. Hi, Stace. It doesn't matter. But I'm excited, though, because it really hit me today. Like, we're really putting together a body of work here, and it feels really good. It's like, it's like collaborating on a book or something. It's really fun.
Funny you say that, because it's such a wonderful, for me personally, counterpoint to all the books I've written, which will be out for print next year sometime, to be able to speak instead of write. I write, so I'm writing alone, but when I write, I'm trying to write to the world in a way that I can try to translate what I want to say to them, and it's hard work to simplify it. But speaking is much easier to simplify because I can hear myself and feel the impact on listeners, which I can't quite do as well when I'm pen to paper.
Yeah.
So I love these things. It is a body of work. You're exactly right.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to be a part of it. Thank you, listeners, for listening, because we can feel it. There's been, in the last couple of weeks, an upswell. We love your feedback. Yeah. So when I get emails or there's Facebook shares or whatever, that is a shot in the arm for us. We're both very driven on our own, but that doesn't mean that your feedback isn't a help, and it spins the wheel and keeps me going for sure. We like it. So thanks.
Absolutely. My whole life, mostly, if I factor all the time in as an upcoming 72-year-old, I've had a very
That's laughable. You so don't look or seem 72. I have a neighbor who's your age, and he acts like 20 years older than you do, whatever that means. Just like,
yeah. Well, and so I've struggled to find audiences for what the hell I'd like to share. And so the podcast is a dream come true for me. I never was able to rely on book sales in the past to keep me afloat, to keep us afloat. So this, to me, even if it's not paid, is such a gift to me to be able to unload from a presence point of view instead of a abstracted language on paper point.
Yeah, nice. Well, speaking of listener feedback, I got a question from someone whose name I didn't ask permission to use, but she'll know that it's her. And the question was about sixth chakra, third eye type stuff, and technology problems, breaking technology, and what causes that, what can be done about it, what does Divinity say about it?
Well, it's easy to put the tail on the donkey of third eye as the cause, but it's certainly the most, we could say, the most effusive generator of an otherwise a soul field of a certain person whose gifts, especially in third eye, but not exclusively, can screw with technology. I learned this about myself many years ago. I was really angry at one point in a relationship, and I went to a gas station and in Oregon, which you
can't pump your own gas.
No, you can't pump your own gas. But I didn't wait. I was so pissed. I couldn't wait. It was really busy, so I was in a far part of the thing, and there was a little wall there, so I did it myself. And when I did, it just stopped. And I went to another one that was right next to it, and it stopped. And I thought, oh, well, they've got a fail safe on there. And then the person came around and says, hey, you're not supposed to do this yourself. I said, yeah, well, your pump's already shut off. Well, no, they don't shut off. So that was my first realization that my field was so upset and dissonant. It screwed with the technology. Well, that got me more pissed. So I drove to the grocery store and did some shopping, got to the electronic cash register, and just completely went offline and started doing goofy things because my field was still interfering with the electronics of the cash machine. So this kind of thing is not unusual for powerful beings when when they've got a lot of juice in their soul field, especially third eye, non-visible, non-measurable, dynamical bandwidths. When you're upset, and especially emotionally, it can really knock out stuff. I was just working with someone this morning a little while ago. And this poor person, everything we tried wouldn't work until I made the person was trying to come through Zoom, trying to come through Signal, trying to come through WhatsApp. Nothing worked until I dialed this person, and then it worked. The author of the dial is the one where it interferes. So
interesting.
In that way. So that just happened to me today. So whoever asked this, what to do about it, not a bloody lot from my point of view, except to realize if you do tend to do that, what a powerful being you are. That's the first thing. Congratulations, I would say, to this person if they are capable of doing that. It means you have bandwidths of consciousness that don't fit into the bandwidths of social contracts that we on the planet have been all mal-conditioned to define as relationality, right? So you're outside the box, and you're then affecting technology that is supposed to be inside of certain bandwidths of reliability and predictability.
It seems like, in my experience, it's definitely not uncommon. It seems to me, in my experience, it tends to be more women than men. Do you think there's any truth to that? Why would that be?
Yeah. Well, we as yang-based beings can segment states of consciousness much more easily, whereas yin-based beings, especially gifted spiritualized yin-based beings, they go whole being this moment, then whole being the next moment, and the next moment. They can't segmentize where we can somehow compartmentalize. I'm pissed. Okay, I can take a breath, and all of a sudden it's much easier for me to be completely different than what I feel if I so choose. But women, especially spiritualized women, why they can't do that so easily. Bless their purity of soulful being.
Bless their whole hearts. Yeah. And of course, this is probably why intuitive women got in so much trouble. The only experience I think I ever had with it, and I have a pretty good third eye, but I don't have much experience breaking things. But in my early 20s, I worked in a copy center in a private company where we were running the copy machines like all day. So there's huge amounts of volume, several machines. And I distinctly noticed that when I was in a better mood, they jammed a lot less. Like I could have done a study on it. If I was in a bad mood, I was clearing jams like every 20 or 30 minutes. If I was in a good mood, it could go all day without a single jam. And that was unmistakable.
Yeah.
I think I probably around that time learned some better control. Not that that's necessarily a good thing, but I learned to segment when I saw that. And but I knew a woman who would break light bulbs. I mean, it doesn't get much more definitive than that. Like the light bulb would just go out,
for sure.
Get angry. So it's a real thing.
It's a real thing, and it doesn't mean the person's possessed, as it would have in the past, or a woman in the days when they were burning women for being more conscious than the men in black of Catholicism, right? Just because they were more advanced, they could. It was palpably generative. For people to feel and perceive the presence they had or the gifts they had. Oh, Satan's in your eyes. No, that's just their gifts coming through their eyes. So you're exactly right, much more so with gifted spiritualized women than men.
if I recall correctly, you don't wear a watch for that reason.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. Thanks for reminding me. It's been so long. I got gifts when I was in high school graduation. I got a watch and I never wore it. And I got a really nice watch but 15 years ago, really beautiful one, not so expensive, but beautiful. And I can't wear them. I put them on and 20 minutes later, they stop working. Even digitized watches don't work on me. I can't wear I can wear wedding ring. I can wear, this kind of thing because there's no circuitry in it.
No
But
moving
you put
parts.
anything, yeah, and I'd like to get an iWatch to check breathing and heart rate, and that kind of thing. But I'm afraid that won't work either. So yeah, I'm doomed. I can't wear watches or any circuitry on my body.
So certainly there are some aspects of this that are wound-based and can be healed, but are you saying that in some cases not, or it's hard to know?
I'm saying it's not a bad thing to have to heal. I'm just, I want to reframe it completely as congratulations. What a powerful being you are. And if it's happening to you, try to, and it aggravates you, try to positify it, not as a layering over of what you feel what you feel. But then after you're done feeling it, congratulate yourself and say, well, rather than something is wrong with me that I do this, reverse it. Well, there's something limiting about technology that doesn't fit for me. And so just that's not narcissism. That's just owning your being as having qualities that don't quite fit in with this world. And for that, you deserve a congratulations.
Mm. And then that creates a space inside of which healing can happen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to affirm not just feeling the negative feelings, but to context them after you feel them, not instead of feeling them. Context them with what is it that's positive? It's just to live into a question. What's positive about this? That's just as important as what's negative about this. What's the source that I need to heal? What's positive about it? And there's always that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting fork in the road where we're talking about the truth that is the essence of positive psychology.
Yes.
Not the expression of it.
No.
But
no.
The we would say that saying yes to it and accepting whatever is entirely and seeing it in some positive light is a prerequisite for dealing with the wound basis of it, whereas positive psychologist leaves it as see it positively, the end.
Yes. Right.
Repeat as necessary.
Rinse and repeat. And repeat. Yeah. And it's important to stress here that it's not, as NLP would say, it's not just about saying it or energizing its truth. It's about feeling the positivity of it. Because it's always in there. And that's another sub fork in the same fork of the road, is to feel that positively as deep as you feel that which needs to be addressed and healed.
Okay.
So yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't help you cure it.
yes. There's no exercise. That's a long-term thing. I know from a number of people who've done a lot of EBE, and it often improves relatively quickly, but doesn't necessarily disappear.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to our fourth realization, which I promised last time. Look at that. I just want to highlight, we're actually going to talk about what I said last time we were going to talk about. So there's some linearity for you.
Yes, we're not addicted to rabbit holes. That's a good way to say it.
Right. Yeah, we're willing to not have them. They're not medications. But I don't know. We'll see. We'd have to maybe do a forced DMED of them for 6 episodes, and it would be interesting to see what happened, but it wouldn't be fun. Okay, so this fourth one is that you're missing out on the vast majority of reality on emotional and spiritual, I guess I should say emotive and spiritual levels.
Yes. Oh, great reframe there.
I'll change it to emotive. That's the deepest. Where should we start with this? This is a big topic.
It's a big topic. Well, first and foremost, we can say that the vast majority of reality on emotive levels is precisely because emotion has always been in some form defined as a weird, sticky form of thought or of mind. And so when we are taught that I think, therefore I am, old Renee's standby, or I have a body, therefore I am, or I is non-dual, therefore I is not, or I am worthy before God, I am unworthy before God, therefore I am worthy before God.
One of the most dastardly metaphysical tricks of all time, right there.
Yes, I am unworthy of God, therefore I'm worthy of God. Mm-hmm. If you orient to any one of those 3 or 4 orientations, which is basically 99% of how we unconsciously operate out of some of one of those 4 or 5, 3 or 4, we're going to miss the fact that emotivity itself, the capacity to have emotions and feelings, is our primary aspect of human consciousness. This is such a radical confrontation of all the other I blank, therefore I am blank orientations of consciousness. It's an entirely different bedrock of foundation to primarily assert that we are emotive beings first before we're ever willful, mental, physical beings, and also energetic, which is an interesting thing to talk about also at some point.
Just for some reason, I'm reminded of that at the old center, before the center, when we were doing doing seminars and stuff in your home in Oregon, the little chalkboard you had in there with a quote on it, when people that was one of my favorite parts of those days, where you'd walk in and be putting your stuff down and there'd be this kind of, not quite, I don't know what the word is, not ominous, but auspicious. Like, here is the thing to be. It was always challenging. And I remember vividly, and I always wrote them down. And I remember this one, it said, what you don't see in yourself, you will not see or exaggerate in others. And that's a really succinct way of talking about how we screen reality out on an emotive level.
Yes. But so when we say, it was so beautifully summarized in this number 4 here, Joseph, that you put together in words, is that the degree we are out of touch of our own emotional primacy of being is what we're going to miss, not only in all the dimensions of emotivity in ourselves, but you'll also miss it in others. You'll take them at face value of what they say or what they believe or how they act, as opposed to what's driving their thinking or their actions or their outcomes.
Yes, right. And this is kind of a controversial part of identity, because when you get really facile with seeing your own originally hidden unconscious motivations, the more you get to know your formerly unconscious motivations, you start to see other people's hidden unconscious motives.
Yes.
And they don't. And then you can't tell someone what they're being unconsciously motivated by. Even if they've hired you to tell them, you got to be careful with that. But you certainly can't do that in peer relationships. And so people will get very pissed, like, hey, you can't tell me what I'm feeling. You can't tell me what I'm thinking. And it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't, but I definitely could.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Shouldn't, but you can. And this is not third eye mediated. Mm-hmm. This is fourth chakra mediated.
Oh, is it? I didn't even. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, if this is not ESP, the more you feel and unendarken your access to your own real emotive states that then are your own emotivity, which is the capacity to have emotions. Once they become patent, you can't help but sense them from here in other people. So it might not be PC to say, I know what you're feeling in ways that you don't, but that doesn't make it untrue. Yeah. And there has to be an auspicious and very carefully respecting boundaries kinds of thing, especially when you're helping people facilitate them. You can't really do that. But in pure relationship, it's just as hard, because you may absolutely know a partner, that your intimate partner is in the throes of a wounded emotive state. But if you start with that, all you'll do is further alienate the bond transaction.
Yeah, for sure.
So, even if, and especially if you're right.
In which case, yes. And now you've got to deal with, for me, where that brings up is, I'm alone with my truth. I'm alone in reality. Nobody listens. I'm invisible. That's the trigger. And the more right you are, the more difficult it is to keep your mouth shut.
Exactly right. And that's where Joseph and I share this addiction in varying degrees and varying domains.
Mm-hmm.
But we're addicted to our truths. And a part of us has learned to be addicted to our truths to be the only way to self-define. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, our truths are at least in the 90 percentile of being accurate.
They're right. They're right enough of the time to make it really difficult to have space around it when no one agrees with you. That's for sure.
Exactly. So it behooves us to go one step meta here, and especially in the emotional state, but it's also spiritual. We'll get to in a moment. Is that we've been malconditioned to start everything with a conscious intention. Okay? Mm-hmm. A conscious intention. And that is an energetic dynamic, even if there's some feelings around it. I intend to make my partner feel good by cooking dinner tonight and having flowers on the table when she gets home from work. Good house husband that I am, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's the intention. And then the intention, the conscious intention, actuates an action, which actuates and creates an outcome. And you want that outcome in that particular example to bring a smile to your beloved and that she will feel loved or cared for by you. But that's how we're malconditioned: conscious intention, action, behavior, and outcome. Identity steps in and says, hold your horses. There is an unconscious motivation level prior to the conscious intention that shapes that conscious intention, either healthily or unhealthily, depending on whether that unconscious motivation is wound-based or not wound-based. And that unconscious motivation, because we are emotive beings first, is always emotional. Whereas the conscious intention is usually energetic with some feelings associated with it. So if you drop out emotivity as a primary, you will also lose track the fact that the unconscious shapes the conscious until the conscious realizes how much the unconscious shapes the conscious.
Yeah, not the conscious can override the unconscious, which is what all of behavioral psychology attempted to do, and all the self-empowerment paradigms, Tony Robbins, NLP, etc. Yeah. It's not overridable because it's upstream.
Exactly. The downstream part of the river can't purify you
can clean the water downstream of the pollution source a little, but never completely. That's the problem.
That's the metaphor. Thank you, sir. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, we miss a whole slab of reality, self-reality in that sense. Mm-hmm. If we're not aware or help to be made aware of our unconscious motives for what could be just stellar conscious motives. Give me a wound-based motivation, unconscious motivation for that scenario I just did, that you want to do these things to make your beloved feel cared for. What unconscious motivation could be operating in such a scenario?
Oh, a parent projection, a parent who trained the kid that their emotional needs was the kid's responsibility. And so they're, in order to be happy, they have an altruistic, I must serve others in order to get what I need dynamic going on. That's be the most common, I would think.
You bet. And that's why until you deconstruct your childhood, which, by the way, if you don't do, will never allow you to be whole in the present adult. But in ways, deconstructing it, Identity offers ways to deconstruct your childhood in a completely different way than psychology does, any kind of psychology, because it starts with a different definition of human consciousness. So it has a different interventional dharma for it. But I was thinking actually where my head is today. I looked in the mirror. Here's an unconscious motivation. I looked in the mirror today after getting out of the shower, and perhaps the man was doing this. He saw that he had his belly was sticking out a little further, and it made him feel insecure about being desirable. So he wanted to do this whole thing, this conscious intention then to make the woman feel good. So maybe they would have sex afterward and make him feel less unattractive.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of things, there's a whole world of unconscious motivations possible underlying our conscious intentions.
And key to say there, if that were the motive, that does not set up a stage for real love to move between the two people.
Yes.
Because the relational space is cluttered with the unconscious need from, which I believe we talked about recently, which clutters the space so that the need with, which is real love, can't actually happen.
And someone out there, I don't know if I'm third eyeing this, who's going to listen to this, what Joseph just said, well, what the hell do you do with that? And here's the farthest downline solution to that horrible tainting that Joseph just said, beautifully taints the whole thing, takes it into unreality. You do nothing. You notice, because you've done enough inner work. Oh, I looked myself in the mirror. I don't feel very desirable. Oh God, an old part of me would want. So you don't do anything. Wait till your beloved comes home, and you pull her aside after she gets settled in, and you say, "Listen, something happened to me today. I looked at myself in the mirror, saw I had a big belly, and I was feeling insecure about my desirability today. So I saw myself wanting to cook for you and have roses for you maybe you would then feel good enough to assure me in some sexual way, perhaps, that I'm desirable. And I just wanted to share that with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted to do. Now there is the complete positive photographic negative of what Joseph just described there. And if you are that kind of person, you will likely have drawn a kind of partner who will then want to have sex with you because you were so honest and vulnerable.
And possibly also add, I probably would have been hooked by that because of my own unconscious wounds where I was trained to please my father and be thin, nice, and pretty and do all the things in order to be accepted. And now I feel relieved I can just be myself. And now I feel even closer to you. That's what we would want as the outcome.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And there, for listeners, that's which could not happen. That positive reframe of what on both sides could not happen unless you learned to a way to find your unconscious wounded motivations, which is why we say we are all responsible for the contents of our unconscious, which is one of our points we'll get to in a much bigger way later on. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, a whole raft of bandwidths, a whole world of emotional bandwidths of reality is missed while we are starting only with conscious intentions, which all self-help stuff starts with. Commit to that intention, and they are completely oblivious about the unconscious motivation that gets all that going.
I have another example of this that's unfolding right now, which is about the fire in Lahaina. As many of you know, I live on Maui, about an hour from Lahaina, which is mostly 80% plus burned down. Mm-hmm. And it's all coming out now, the root issues here. There was no stopping the fire, but the how it was handled and how it continues to be handled could be better and has been bad. And partially motivated by my own truth medication, I wrote almost 3,000 words about the root cause of all this in the last few days. And I've been talking to people on Facebook and whatnot about it. I just published it on my list and on LinkedIn today, pointing to, and it was the truth med was operating and the anger in me about it. But then when I started to turn this into, I'm going to present this to the world and challenge some value systems that actually made it scary for me, then that sort of made it okay for me. And the root diagnosis that I offered, speaking of like the aspects of reality that are not seen to most, is the collectivistic values in the Hawaiian culture.
Yes.
Which is just like, if your inner reality is, I don't know, a little bit significantly clean and clear, you just can't not see this. So it came out today. I was already writing about this, and then it came out today that the chief emergency, the guy who's in charge of Maui emergencies, he's being looked at as completely unqualified for the job. And how did he get the job? Because of who he knows. Because he's part of the ohana, the Hawaiian word for family, which translates into connection and harmony, and people that you know doing well is more important than competence. And that is everywhere on this island. And everyone who lives here knows it. The corruption is... It's not even malevolent. It's just like, oh, well, of course we put him in this job. And then I found out in the course of reading this article, because I promise I'll just do a high level of it. I think I've told you about this, but our listeners should hear some of this insanity. I live on a dirt road. It is legally classified by Maui County as, quote, an old government road. That means it belongs to the old government that does not exist anymore. So the neighbors don't own it. The county doesn't own it. It's an old government road. So that means nobody alive owns this road. It is legislatedly disowned, right?
Wow.
So to get
improvements,
they take no responsibility. It is written in the code that is not only is it not the county's responsibility, but we all pay property taxes here. Not only is it legislated that it's not their responsibility, but it's legislated that if they do something to help the road, that is not an expression of ownership, nor will they be held liable. So getting the neighbors around here organized to put money into it is like herding cats. So what happens is myself and 3 or 4 other neighbors at the end of the road, those of us who drive the most of the road, we ended up funding all of the road improvements. I'm actually the treasurer of that little mini organization. There is a bridge on this road that is like at least, I don't know, 80, 100, maybe more years than that old. It has cracks underneath it and exposed rebar. It's called spalling. The rebar is rusting. A few years ago, that kind of spalling destroyed a condo in Hawaii, in Florida, and killed almost 100 people. That's happening to this bridge. If a fire engine needed to come down here, or an ambulance, or if there were a fire down here, it would cut us all off. We would be stranded. We could walk on a different path, but we'd be stranded. I sent 30 emails and like 20 phone calls to the director of public works when we started to realize this bridge was failing. She did not respond at all whatsoever. No response at all. Guess what? She's the wife of this chief emergency guy. Her qualifications, most of her life, she was an elementary school teacher. Now she's not even director of public works anymore. So this is the underlying. So, but what are you going to do? It's like, okay, well, could they backburn, and could Maui Electric have turned the power off as soon as the poles started to fall, which they definitely should have, as soon as
turned on the 80 sirens.
Yeah, which they didn't do. And they're like, but the people might have thought that the sirens meant a tsunami, and they would have run uphill. And then you go to the county website or the state website, I forget which, and it says the sirens can mean any of the following, and it includes fires. Or maybe you put in a second siren if you think it might be confusing. Any of these things that would actually be your job.
Yeah.
And then, so all of how they're handling it has just been screw up after screw up after screw up. But what there is not an appreciation for is the very essence of this goes down to, as we talked recently about, it goes down to the very values that and it's understandable because it's basically an occupied territory by the United States, and locals feel deeply hurt and victimized because of that. And so what happens when you persecute a people? They get together and stick together for dear life, and they focus on what sticks them together. And if keeping locals in these kinds of government jobs does that and makes them feel better, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And it leads to a completely incompetent government, and we should expect nothing to change unless that issue is addressed. Makes me crazy.
Wow, yeah. Joseph, that was so beautiful a deconstruction of a current, literally hot and tragic topic. And I'd like to just nibble at a couple of adjoining rabbit holes of that. Mm-hmm. And that is what Joseph's tirade, which I feel is completely reasonable, because underneath that, his truth about all that is caring for the humans that didn't, maybe 50 less people would have died had there been a competent overview of the whole system, right? So that's what's driving Joseph's some of sort of mania, and it also drives some of my mania. It's not about egotism or needing to be right. It's about caring.
And it is. Thank you for that. And it's like the death count just eclipsed 100 today, and it's going to be near 1,000 based on how many people are still missing. But you know what? And I see so many stories on Facebooks, and I've got friends of friends who've lost people, and so I'm seeing all of this in my various feeds. But what really hits me, because in some ways they're more innocent, is the reports and the pictures of burned pets.
Yeah.
Because the people didn't have time to collect anything, much less their cats and dogs. Yes. And so the Humane Society is filled with, I think, I can't remember, it was at least 300, maybe even more, thousands. People are finding these burned pets, these innocent beings.
Yeah.
And it's just like the idea that because of these smaller things that never get addressed, that you can't get anything done with the government here in a single phone call or a single email, that it takes this grinding persistence because of how inefficient it is. If that resulted in any more suffering than was necessary, that's just not okay.
Yeah, exactly right, Joseph. Well said. Okay, so I want to nibble at another rabbit hole, and that is that much bigger problem in our world today that's been politicized. And that is what everything that Joseph said is true of tribal collectivism, consciousness, right? Especially occupied tribal consciousness, as Joseph said. But tribal consciousness is not being criticized here.
Right.
There are magical, mystical dynamics to the Hawaiian. What's the magic called? I always forget. Mana. So much mana. Mm-hmm. My wife and I know about this road Joseph was talking about in his metaphor for the incompetency. And I thought the same thing as soon as we went over it. My God, I'm always looking that way. I used to go to Puerto Vallarta a couple times in my younger years. And we're so far from the airport. If there was something that stopped the road, we would be trapped in Puerto Vallarta and never be able to get to the airport home. Same principle here. But there is a mana, so much mana in tribalism that the white occupiers have no clue about. And Joseph himself is a mystic from the ground up. But here he is a perfect example, and so am I, of mystics who also inhabit caring as competency. Mm-hmm. In other words, the competency in this world is not usually based in caring. It's based in willful self glory or something. Mm-hmm. But in our world, competency and caring are indivisible. So does all the mana and the mystical basis of the Hawaiian tribes that were completely occupied by the United States, is there value to that? There is. But where tribal collectivism meets non-tribal competency requirements, here is the zone that Joseph is talking about that does not fit. Mm-hmm. And so there's truth on both sides is what I wanted to bring here. There's no rundown of the mysticality, but we are walking examples, Joseph and I, of mystics who hold themselves to caring competency and by extension hold others to that when it fails. So, and last rabbit hole in this, white nationalism, MAGA type distortions of consciousness use this very argument as racist for non-white tribal or non-white cultures who never didn't instigate mechanization and industrialization. And thereby justify that the white race in that way that did initiate undeniably all the mechanization and all the industrialization that's resulted in our modern world, good and bad effects, that the whites are the true leaders of the world. They use this exact kind of tribal separation.
It's like individualism in service. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. They will say that they should appreciate the occupiers for bringing roads and industrialization to your agrarian culture. Yes, and be careful here. So they use this very thing that Joseph so heartfully confronted in a racist way, literally a racist way, that justifies MAGA type worldviews, that the brown and the black darker races are just tribal and their cultures didn't start mechanization. But there's room in the world for both of us. The non-white tribal orientations where so much of the non-religious magical spirituality has happened and can't translate to the modern world. It's not often said this way. Last point, identity is trying to be that bridge to bring the value of pre-rational, pre-egoic cultural magic and spirituality can coexist with egoic level dynamicals of civilization and, in this case, competence. You can be both. There's no way to be both in our current paradigms of our planet. But this is one of we don't really speak to this much. One of the contributions Identity has is to span that bridge, that chasm between pre-industrial societies, no matter the amount of melanin in the skin, and more industrialized consciousness, that there's a way for those to coexist and have the positives of both. Because the positive industrial mechanization version would be to be aware of the impact that such development would have on the agrarian tribalism and make that part of the joint a joint project to improve everything on Hawaii in this case, without losing the magic. But the whites tend to be superiorize themselves that way. Then the non-whites or the tribal. In this case, when I was there visiting, Bree and I were visiting Joseph and his woman, his beloved there. We came across a direct person who hated us because we were tourists ruining the virgin land of Hawaii. So this is an impasse that can be solved with an emotional, emotive, soulful aspect of consciousness first.
Yeah, the colonists, as it were, need to own the invasiveness and the economic oppression that they've imposed, and the local populations have to take responsibility for their woundedness and the victimhood expressions of it, and there can be a working together thing. But there's just this giant divide. And I've experienced plenty of racism personally, because it's white people are the minority here, and and so I've valued the experience to have that experience. Like, oh, this is what it's like to be brown in the United States. That's interesting and valuable. But it's
reverse racism.
Yeah, basically. I mean, what they call reverse racism, which is very white focused and of into itself.
Yes.
But I mean, I remember, I don't know if I mentioned that on this podcast once, but it was a Chinese or Japanese, I think it was Chinese that was looking for a place to rent years and years ago here. And I said, she had a couple different buildings, and she'd mentioned the rent on one place and not the rent cost on another. I said, how much are you renting that for? And she said, well, I don't want to talk money with you because you're Jewish and you'll out negotiate me. I was frozen. I did not know what to say. I was like, wow, I kind of like left my body a little bit and was like, she's a potential landlord, so I don't want to like get into a conflict with her. But it was like, oh, so that's what it's like. Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Another time, a white woman who has lived here a really long time said to me once, one of these days I got to pick your Jewish brain and get some help with my finances. And I said, so, yeah, I was like, so it's first of all, the Judaism's in my brain, and that's why I'm good with money. Is that where you're getting that from? And she's like, oh, no, but I'm saying something good. Oh, so if it's good and it's like ethnicity or race based, then it's okay. Like, oh, so confused.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That was a beautiful way to bring forward the unconscious motives lying in tribal consciousness that had a hugely deleterious effect on life and limb.
And one more thing about that, the tribal consciousness is like consensus based, right? So in an emergency, you need a fucking hierarchy. Yes. There needs to be someone at the top that says, this is the deal, this is what we're going to do. And right. I think it was, 3-4 days ago when the fires were mostly contained, the cops went back and forth like 3 times on the road to Lahaina. They opened it and then they closed it and then they opened it and they closed it. And you can see videos of people, the crowds are like just giving them such a hard time because like, make up your minds. And there's this one video of a cop with a megaphone saying, we're no longer giving, they'd set up this whole placard thing where you have to have a certain placard to go out there that proves you live there and whatever. And they're on the megaphone and the cop is saying, yeah, we're not giving out any more placards. Sorry, there are powers that be. I know you're disappointed, but like, where's the reasoning? Where's the sense? Where's the hierarchy of this is what we're doing and why we're doing it? And last thing, I'll shut up about this. 4 days ago, it was announced, I think it was the governor, Josh Green, said, don't come to Maui. Everybody's saying, don't come to Maui. Take your vacation elsewhere. We don't want you here. It's not a good time. And then 3 days after that, it said, okay, well, you can come, but just stay away from West Maui. Like, really, guys? Like, is that so hard to sort out what the plan's going to be? Maybe you should have thought about this 6 months or 6 years ago, how you would handle an emergency like this if it were to happen, given, how did they handle Hurricane Iniki that happened in 94 or so on Kauai? Like, they must have made decisions about tourism then. Did you not come up with a plan? Like, why are you making this up as you go along now? It's not what people need.
Oh, thanks for bringing that dimension in, because you're exactly right. Consensus collectivism is ill-suited to the challenges of a modern society. Mm-hmm. And if people are triggered by the word hierarchy in some industrialized context, replace it with responsibility. Mm-hmm. Because everything that Joseph said using the word hierarchy was someone take responsibility for decision making, and that decision making process is cogent, and that here's how it should unfold in this situation. Who's in charge? When the king or the queen of the Hawaiian culture is no longer the ultimate authority, it's just consensus circularity. There's no linear way to bandwidth emergency interventions. Yeah. So responsibility is what we're talking about here. Yeah. And so let's complete that. We talked a lot about the emotional, and this was an emotive, energetic of a collective culture that feels itself as a community first and not individuals first. And we live in a world now, modern society, with the U.S. and France just a few years later, constitutionally making the individual the unit of reverence and focus, not the collective. So in that sense, how we can do, because the question here, or your statement says that we're missing the vast majority of reality on emotional and spiritual levels.
Yeah.
Let's go to the spiritual now.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's based on, here's Identity's offering. You can like it or not like it. It's up to you. We don't care. We just put out what we do. We would like it if you did, because it would feels like it would make a better world. But
we really don't know.
We really don't know. But anyway, I've over the years made one word out of this now: emoto soulful. We are emoto soulful beings first. A distinction between emotivity and spirituality is tenuous. You can't unlink those two. And here's what it's based on: not just Stace's opinion, but that when you learn that divinity is not an angry and jealous God, as Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all maintain, we're incepted in a time where the male God is angry and jealous. And you have to fear God because of its wrath and power. Judaism pioneered that orientation. And so in that sense, but in contrast, all the non-religious great spiritual teachers aver that divinity, God, is love, not an angry, jealous God. I mean, jealousy is only possible to emotionally wounded people who are not whole in themselves, so they're jealous. So when Yahweh is jealous that the Hittites, or whatever, not the Hittites, I always forget the Semites.
I can't remember.
Non-Jewish societies were threatening early Judaism, Judea. Semites, I think.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Smite the energy that are not Jews, that are not Jewish. Right? That's an angry, jealous God.
Yeah, we would say by modern psychological terms that God needs a therapist for his insecurity in such a case.
Yes. Only insecure people are jealous and angry. Sorry, when you're whole in yourself, you're not either angry or jealous.
And for how long have we appreciated as a species that jealousy as a shadow emotion? Like pretty long. I think that's pre-psychological, isn't it?
Well, it certainly was out there, and is a thread to be shaped into a psychological concept. Yeah. But the point I want to make here is that non-religious teachers outside of those big three would say when they do aver a God, that it's made of love and nothing else. That is Identity's, my experience of divine being. It is love and nothing else, no anger, no jealousy. That's just my realization with it, or my experience with it. And love is an emotive dynamic. It's not a thought. Love is not a thought. It can't be defined. You can define some of its effects, but you can't define love itself. I love Dr. Arroway when she's in Contact, when she's arguing with Matthew McConaughey's religious scholar, and they're arguing, well, I would need some proof, Dr. Arroway says, of this divine thing you're talking about. And he goes, proof, huh? Did you love your dad? And she says,
yes, very much.
Yes, very much. And he looked at her and took beat of time, half a beat of time, prove it. Mm-hmm. You cannot, love is not a thing that is definable, that has any sort of measurable dynamical shape to prove it. You can prove it by your actions, but the feeling, the dynamical source that love is undefinable by dualistic languaging or conceptualizations. So love, if divine beings experienced as human beings in its biggest totality as love, that is an emotive dynamical, not a thought or conceptual dynamical. And if we're all progeny, which all the big religions say we are children of God, then we are love first, because we couldn't otherwise be, in our naturalist nature, love first. And what does that mean? We're emotive first. So this is not, this emotional first primacy comes out of a direct linear a direct linear unfolding of what we're made of, which is love. And the fact that we've been malconditioned to default to be will first in this world instead of love first belies the question. So when this means that there's no real difference between emotivity and spirituality, you see, emotive, soulful beings first, energetic beings second, as an expression, willful beings third, mental beings fourth, physical beings fifth, you could say also, in order if you put energy, plug energy in there. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, when you do not relate to emotive primacy of human consciousness, you're going to screen out all the experiences of a love-based God that religion helps you avoid by their diagnosis of an angry, jealous, patriarchal asshole called Yahweh or Allah or God. Those are all for identity false gods, and that billions, that about 45% of us on the planet regularly believe in that kind of God. Is 40% of us maybe is a sorrow for identity. I'm criticizing the metaphysics here, not the good people who are searching for God in whatever form that would take. Sure. The best thing about religions is that they provide a context for what's sacred in life and give people time to ruminate on things other than the ABC black and white of every day.
And they provide morality for people who wouldn't necessarily have any.
Absolutely right. Even though it's under the sword of Damocles, if you don't, you go.
But that's what young souls need. They need rules.
Yeah, they do. So we're not running down the rank and file of good people who don't know how to connect a divine being as anything except through the lens or doorway of religion. We're criticizing the metaphysics and the teachings of the big five or the big three religions in this case.
What's tricky to talk about, though, that I want to get to with both sainthood and sagehood, but I guess we're on sainthood subject at the moment, is how do we bring that down a level to talk about how a person would experience day-to-day, moment-to-moment reality differently when they have some amount of abidement with the divine? It's hard to describe.
It is, but the most difficult way, let's start with that, because it's all inclusive then. We don't miss any beats. Mm-hmm. The more you discover, the more you heal and remove from your consciousness the emotional body ensoulment of identity, subtracts yourself on the way to your authentic soulful being. So the best way to know, to answer this question, how can I have an experience of the divine that affects my everyday life? You find your soul first. When you find your authentic, emotive, soulful being that's been malconditioned to be covered over and shoved down, you are at the most patent open door to experiencing God. Because our soul consciousness, which is buried underneath our personhood, our personal consciousness by bad conditioning, malconditioning, incomplete conditioning, obfuscates our experience of God. So in the most difficult ways to process your way to God, which EBE does. That's the most difficult. Now, but your question also, okay, so yes, okay, let's say that's true. How can you do it today? How can you possibly do that today?
Or what would happen? I mean, that's the tricky thing is like to tell someone like, what would it be like to have that kind of abiding experience? It's to say, well, to really answer that question, we'd have to say, you'd have to be able to answer what's the difference between you and your soul. Yes. And I was talking with a client recently and it hit me that ensoulment, that's what the word used for it. Ensoulment, it's like putting together a puzzle when there's no picture on the box.
Yes.
So you're putting the pieces together, but you don't know what you're putting together. In the beginning, you're just placing pieces and you have no idea what you're going to turn into.
Wow, beautiful metaphor.
And then, so how will you experience reality differently? Well, you'll be experiencing it more as your own soul. Well, how will that be? Well, in one way, nobody can tell you that.
Right.
But there are some broad principles we could say, right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Bree made a beautiful comment recently, and it's going to be part of what goes on our new website too, that there's no way to teach emotion first.
No.
The process of learning it is the education. It can't be taught. You have to feel your way through it, not linearly visualize your way to it, right? So the education of what it means to be spiritual in a moment or emotive in a moment has to be is discovered. Things have to be subtracted out of the scales have to fall from your eyes to have the heartful experience. And what I love about you bringing this forward is I just had a momentary tirade and called the god of religions an asshole, right?
Yes, you did.
As much as you were tirading against the incompetency of collective tribalism in the modern day, but what was driving both my asshole comment and your tirade? Caring. Because the good that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam may do is, in our picture of things, tragically equal only, not more than, the harm that it does in its pogroms, in its theocracy, and in its caliphatism, the suffering that it causes women. All three of those religions are absolutely frank patriarchy, with a patriarchal God in all three cases. And so how could they not be patriarchal? So in that sense, when I called it that, I was calling out the metaphysics of a false God out of care, so people might have room one day to discover the real divinity of love, which you can't do while you're putting in the collection basket support for religions that teach an angry and jealous God. So there's room for human reactivity, our human passion here, our human emotion. But know that both my tirade and Joseph's are based in caring, not egotism or righteousness. It's caring for what could be possible. And when people only hear us in that kind of way as negative tiraders, never feel the care that's underneath that drives it. So,
well, and maybe I could be feeling more of the care myself. That's for sure. It's far more comfortable for my shadow to tirade than to express vulnerable care still.
It is.
One thing.
Go ahead.
Well, one thing I wanted to insert here, because it's difficult, like I said, to get specific about how it changes things. But one thing that I notice a lot with clients and in myself is the search for meaningfulness. That the search for meaningfulness is proof of not abiding with the inherent meaningfulness in life.
Yes.
You don't have to go looking for meaning. It's right here.
Right.
And sagehood and sainthood both impart some of that. And so what I see in people, that it surprises me how much people are looking for meaning in content, especially travel. Remember that Adam Sandler thing I sent you a few days ago? The travel agent who's telling you, if you're sad now, you're probably going to be sad in Italy. You know, it's so funny. And
yeah, exactly right.
To say like, this is not going to solve your problems. And I find it so ironic that the word travel comes from tripoliare, meaning was a torture device in Latin. It literally means torture.
Wow.
Because it's the same root as travails in French.
Travail, travel, yeah,
and
that's
it's the
right.
same root as trabajo for work in Spanish. It all comes from the word for torture. It was instead of a cross, it was 3 sticks that they used to torture people. So the addiction we have as a species to content, we have to get our next content fix, whether it's sugar or travel or some kind of, or even a spiritual experience. For identity, it's not about pursuing spiritual experiences, which is really common, and I definitely got a little bit hooked in the plant medicine world. You can have spiritual experiences. That doesn't make you a spiritual being.
Yes, that's right.
A spiritual being is having spiritual experience most of the time, if not all of the time. And so they don't need to carve out a segment of time in order to have a certain spiritual experience, to contentize it in order to feel that their life is meaningful, because they're already coming from meaning into meaning. There's no non-meaning. There's no cooking your eggs in the morning is not a meaningless act, or there's no meaning because there's no not God anywhere.
Yes. So how do we tie all this together? Well, this is an important rabbit hole we've gotten into, the relationship between what looks like judgment and actual caring, right? So I'd like to just say a few words on that. We complete this piece. And that is that passion. What I just did with the God of these big three religions, and what Joseph did with the zeitgeist of the Hawaiian situation that helped support the Lahaina tragedy, is that sometimes passionate discernment looks like judgment. It looks like judgment, but we would say that this difference is. Judgment only occurs when you withhold or withdraw love from that which you just discerned. Okay. So I was discerning the metaphysics of the God of the big three religions and tirading against it. That was passionate discernment. But I didn't withdraw love or withhold love from the people who need religion to feel some sense of the sacred. So there's something that doesn't go together in our conditioning very well. People think that passionate discernment means judgment, but judgment is only when you withdraw or withhold love from it in our world anyway. So they can coexist, passionate discernment and love. I want to make that point here. I tirade. You remember in the old days, part of me loved to tirade.
Sure.
But I remember one time I think before your times, I got on a tirade about something in the world, and someone said, "Well, you just proved to me that you're not a man of God because you're angry all the time." And the person just sat there after you said that like this, and then someone else stood up and said, "I got from what you said before." This is someone else speaking to the person, that you're a Christian, right? And he was, God damn straight, I'm a Christian. You know, he didn't have a Texas drawl, but I had to throw that in.
He does in the dramatization. He does. Nice. That was very meta.
Sorry,
he didn't actually have that, but in the story, he does.
Absolutely, because it captures the bandwidth of his consciousness.
Totally.
The Texas drawl, the Texas drawl. At any rate, damn straight, I'm a Christian. And he said, well, how do you explain Jesus and the money changers in the temple?
Yeah, I use that one.
And the guy went like this. And he said, this guy, he said, I could feel, Daniel, I was called at that time, I could feel Daniel's care all through that tirade. But all you saw was anger, and then said that he couldn't have God. Well, how do you explain Jesus, who was a son of God by your world view, yet he was also privy to passionate outbursts based in caring? And the guy just went completely mute and just got a bad look on his face like this. He couldn't respond. But what it did was immediately make me cry because someone felt my care as the origin of my tirade, and not just because I needed to have a truth of mine egotistically expressed. And so this is how complexly malconditioned we are, that all changes when we start coming from here in our personhood, which automatically links our heart, immediately always links us to our soul in the next.
And whenever I tirade like that, there's always a me watching to being like, am I really, is there enough care in here? So it's like, I would predict that, a year from now, there'll be more emotivity and less energy for me in those.
There you go.
And, it makes me think of, there's this beautiful book that Adyashanti wrote called The Resurrection of Jesus, that is a spiritual treatment of the New Testament. Super cool book. And he talks about scenes like the money tables, and also the will the loneliness scene when everyone else is asleep and Jesus is awake, and that scene. And he
in
talks
the garden,
in the garden, right? And he talks about the Jesus, the human, and Jesus, the spiritual being, and the sort of continuum of that. Like, it's not about being the light of God all the time. That's not what Jesus was, even by the Christian accounts. Nor is that what real spirituality is actually about. Sometimes that will be what expresses where, the truest aspects a human being can carry come through. And then it might not be so outraged, but other times there's God moving through the human element, and there's passionate dualistic opinions that come through as well.
Absolutely.
And they're not exclusive.
Exactly. Yet the world polarizes those two. Religions tend to polarize it as shoulds, as opposed to a gradient of dynamical bandwidths in the spiritual human. So
I always use Martin Luther King Jr. as an example for good anger. Like, you can feel how angry he is, but it's not petty. It's not personal. It's more emotive than it is energetic. There's this boiling anguish in him.
Anguish.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
exactly.
You can feel that. So you can tell he's angry, but he doesn't direct that at anyone. And you just can't not listen to the guy.
Yeah.
So would we say, like, well, that's just petty human outrage? It's like, no, he's a channel for truth, embodied truth when he speaks, when he spoke.
Yes. Yep.
And it moves people. That's the proof, is when it reaches people.
And I can hook right onto that. His namesake qualifies for the same thing, Martin Luther.
Martin Luther, yeah, sure.
His rage, literally, against selling indulgences of the Catholic Church, where you can buy from your bishop forgiveness for your sins, as long as you fill the coffers of the Vatican, right? That was his outrage, and he banged that list of.
I was just going to say, no, he didn't. That's the best part. That's what he's most famous for, and people think of him. He nailed his 95 thesis on the door of a church. Nailed it, like,
Wittenberg.
Wow.
That's the cathedral in Wittenberg.
The cathedral, yeah, like, wow, that takes some balls. Like, I'm nailing this to your building.
Absolutely right. And look, he was in. Where did his anger come from? The absolute corruption of the Catholic Church in that situation, which I wish I could say, it's my opinion, that they have improved since then. Yeah. But that's another whole podcast. But the idea here is that the spirit working through the human sometimes can look non-godly, but it doesn't mean it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one more thing I wanted to sneak in here before we go, and that is because we haven't talked much about sagehood, which if sainthood is difficult to talk about, the realities it illuminates. And we haven't talked about the third eye aspect of it, but not in this episode, but in seeing soul species. Oh man, do you know how useful it is to be able to be dealing with a TSA agent or a cop and realize they're a Geffian soul? That can save your ass. So there's being able to see soul species, which is for sure an aspect of reality screened out by most people, really changes your life significantly, because you know how to relate with people. Just like you would relate usually with a man versus a woman differently. There's 27 different soul species, and you relate with them differently. But exactly. But the backlighting that sagehood offers is a very difficult thing to talk about. The most immediate thing that I notice from whatever access I have to it is I can tell when people are lying a lot better than I used to.
Ooh, say more about that. How does non-dual access help that?
It's what I would say is, and this is all metaphor, and I get why the Zen people of the years use so much nature metaphors. It's like my experience is a much stiller pond of reality. So when if the pond is still as a function of truth, then untruth makes ripples in the pond. Well, I guess there can be two different kinds. There's true ripples.
Yes.
It can ripple true in the stillness of the pond, or it can ripple false. Yes. And there's a sort of contraction to it. And so I used to actually be a terrible read of people and social situations, like way below average, which is probably the biggest change that I've experienced through identity. And now I can not always, certainly, but I like when I work with clients, in the beginning of a session, they just talk, and then I just go based on the ripples. I wait until they say something that ripples false, and then I get curious about it. That's so easy. It's so easy. All you got to do is follow the ripples. You don't really have to even understand I even do this with business clients who are telling me about stuff I don't necessarily understand in their industry, and this is happening, and this is happening, and then I just wait for them to say something that ripples false, and then I start asking questions, and I find something that needs to be fixed. That's really simplifying.
I love that you brought that vector up, because most of the time when I've done that in the past, from my own access to the non-dual, I'm accused of using my third eye to see those ripples.
Well, that's in there too. That's what asks the questions.
I know, but these are two very different dynamics. I used to teach after I woke up from my non-dual notness. I used to teach that when someone asked me, well, what is it like to have your whole dualistic being tabula rasa, your whole mind tabula rasa? And I said, well, everything is level. Mm-hmm. There's no things taller or shorter than anything else. Everything is all the same in that zone, which is the metaphor in my version here of your still pond, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when things stick up pointedly, you're being dualistically invested, and that has if it's a true one, it vibrates a certain way. But when a pointy one comes up that you're invested in a dualistic position, see, there's no positionality in the Zen true world. Nothing coalesces into a position strong enough to call it a position. You're just with things as they are. And so, but there's a different vibration for a lie. So I realized, is very similar as you after my event, how much more I could discern of subtle ripples of either in overinvested good truth or overinvested not untruth. And that's all a function of non-dual enlightened access, not just attributable to, for example, third eye, which is part of sainthood and identity.
But it makes space for the third eye to operate too. The two together work very well.
It does. So there's a very practical integration of personal reality with non-dual sagehood, something that Zen and classical Buddhism cannot do when they ascribe illusionality to the personal.
Yeah, so when you combine what we talked about before, the being able to read out and feel people's unconscious emotive motives, when you add that with third eye images and information that you get from people, and also this like sagehood level true false thing, that's a pretty different way of processing reality. It certainly is from where I came from.
You could say that. I once said exactly in that way. I once was doing more of a Zen themed talk at right before I met you, and the person listened and they said, well, I'm having cognitive dissonance right now. And I said, usually that's a good thing. What are you cognitively dissonant about? He goes, you have way too much excess personality to be enlightened. Yet I can feel the fact that you are. So I don't know how to put that together, because most of these dudes, that are fairly unemotionally colorful. And I said, well, I'm an Enneagram 4, so that helps a bit. But there's that livability of these kinds of esoteric things, third eye's esoteric and sainthood, and non-dual, of course, and sage. Those kinds of things can coexist with juicy humanity. Not staid weirdness or out there dramatizations of what ESP isn't, for example. So in this sense, I love that you brought that in, that sagehood also involves perceptual acuity in bandwidths that the mind simply cannot capture.
Another good detail example, and I know you have this ability as well, is when someone asks a question that's not actually the question that they have.
Uh-huh.
That's a real
yeah.
classic teacher thing. You learn to be able to read the frequency of that. You just feel it. Someone will ask a question and it appears really sincere, and you just get a, I could answer that, but I don't want to, because I can tell that's not, and that's a combination of third eye, the still pond, and the emotional motives, especially the emotional motives, because you can feel something in there has twisted itself into some contortion to be able to ask a question that's not really what their question is. There's a a movement back, a contraction, and a something forward at the same time. That just happened to me this morning.
Oh boy, I love that you say that. I have a quick example of that.
Please.
Once someone said, how can, and this person was really in a lot of pain, how can there be a God and allow the evil in the world? And I said, well, I could answer that for metaphysics, from a metaphysical point of view, very easily. But what I'm really feeling you're asking is, God, I want you. Where are you? And that changed the valence of this person completely in that moment. And then we were down to brass tacks, because I felt the unconscious motive that precipitated that very desperate kind of, that was an easy one. That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Imagine to be able to feel that on an everyday basis.
Yeah, and well, the result of that is you stop wasting so much time having superficial conversations, because you get right down to what's actually being talked about, whether it's being initially named or not.
Right.
And that's the healing of the split between the inside and the outside.
Absolutely.
That's why small talk becomes difficult. But you've been saying you've been starting to enjoy small talk in some small doses.
Well, I wouldn't say enjoyment with a capital E, but I have gotten more facile in finding bandwidths of small talk that doesn't repel me or bore me. When you can think paradigmatically, it's that is such a high order function of consciousness compared to small talk. So how about the Mets,
but what's painful for me about that is they say, how about those Mets? And what I hear is, I need to find some content common ground so I feel comfortable talking to you. And then I just get confused, where it's like, wait, what do you want? What? What are we doing?
God. Oh boy. Yeah. So, and that's not running down consciousness that only knows how to small talk. That's younger souls. It's all okay. But where do people think the vision to recognize soul species or the vision to recognize age of our incarnation and what that means to how we are with each other? Where does that come from? It comes from personal, sagely, and saintly transmutations that happen when you start to address healing the meta existential terrors of being, not being, and non-being, which is another whole story below all of our woundings that are just downstream versions of those three. So in this sense, we've covered a lot of ground today about the majority of reality bandwidths that are screened by emotional and spiritual levels, screened by our malconditioning. So, that was what today. Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks.
I love how you've summarized these 18 points. I would not have languaged them all the way that you did, but the way you did is so helpful to open doors.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the next one we have on the list is, I don't know if we can make a podcast out of this, but I don't know if I could. I'm sure you could. Number 5, that you have a specific purpose for being here. Well, actually, now that I say it, I think I would have things to say about it.
Oh, yeah. We'll have no trouble filling the podcast with that.
Why are we here? One of the 3 most important questions of the human race.
Yes. Who are we? What are we? And why are we? That's what we start with in Identity.
All right. Thank you, Stace. Thank you, listeners. If you guys have questions, let me know. You know how to reach me. Until then, we'll talk to you next time. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Divinity, please visit identity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.